Hello, everyone. Welcome to Librarian Support for Evidence Synthesis Outside the Health Sciences, brought to you by ACRL University Library Section's Professional Development Committee. We're so delighted to have you and our presenters here today. I am Colleen Quinn, co-chair of the committee. I will be moderating this program along with my fellow co-chair, Anna Sandelli. This is one of an ongoing series of online programs sponsored by our committee. Let me go ahead and drop a link to our programs in the chat there. Before I introduce our presenters, a few logistics. This session is being recorded, and we will send the link of the video, slides, and any other supplemental documentation to everyone who registered for the program. Please note that we are not able to share the chat transcript due to privacy reasons, but we will be sure to share any links or questions we receive in the chat along with the webinar recording. The program will run for an hour total, including time for questions. Please feel free to add questions into the chat box throughout the presentation at any time. Anna will be collating them, and I will be prepared to read them to today's presenters. Just another note, as you use the chat feature, please make sure you send your message to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see what you're asking. Of course, if you do have a private question for the hosts and panelists, please feel free to remain there and you may send us a note as well. We will post a link to a brief evaluation in the chat box after the Q&A session. Please take a few moments to give us your feedback on today's program. With those announcements out of the way, I am very happy to start today's program, Librarian Support for Evidence Synthesis Outside the Health Sciences. I'll briefly introduce our two presenters, and then they can more fully introduce themselves as they see fit. So first we have Megan Kocher, who is a science evidence synthesis librarian at the University of Minnesota, as well as Amy Riegelman, who is a social sciences and evidence synthesis librarian at the University of Minnesota. And without further delay, I will hand it over to our panelists.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Riegelman. We are delighted to be here talking about one of our favorite topics, evidence synthesis. You can go to the next slide, Megan. Here we are. So we are, as mentioned, Amy Riegelman, Megan Kocher. We are both from the University of Minnesota. We have a couple slides here featuring more information, so I'll have you advance again, Megan. Thank you. So I'm the social sciences wing of our evidence synthesis service. Megan and I have very similar job descriptions, both having evidence synthesis in the title, and then our respective disciplines. We both have some liaison responsibilities. I'm responsible for the psychology department, educational psychology, child development, and speech language and hearing sciences. In the whole realm of evidence synthesis, just some background that Megan and I lead an initiative, an IMLS funded grant to build capacity for supporting evidence synthesis work, and it's tailored to librarians. Megan is the PI and I'm the co-PI. I have taken an interest in finding gray literature aspects of evidence synthesis and the value of doing that work, specifically studying how to identify preprints. I've been involved in some work on how to best identify when the literature that you've now discovered is problematic for reasons such as it's being retracted, there are expressions of concern, different status changes. I've been involved in the Campbell collaboration. So this would be like the gold standard for evidence synthesis in the social sciences. Campbell is a sister organization to Cochrane. I'm the information specialist for the disability coordinating group within Campbell collaboration, sorry. And then lastly, I'm associate editor at Research Synthesis Methods. So when there are submissions pertaining to the librarian support of evidence synthesis, those go through me and the other librarians who serve as associate editors. And I'm going to have Megan introduce herself next on the next slide.
Yeah, so I'm Megan Kocher, and so as Amy said, we share those responsibilities of both leading our evidence synthesis service for the non-health sciences disciplines at the University of Minnesota, and that is a service we'll talk a lot about in this, but that we conceptualized and sort of grew. Amy and I worked on that together and have built that service over the last, how many years has it been? Since like 2017 or so. Um, and yeah, longer than it seems like. My subject areas that I'm a liaison for are food science and nutrition, soil, water, and climate, and applied economics. Um, so Amy said we work on the Evidence Synthesis Institute. I do a lot of scoping reviews in agriculture as sort of a specialty of mine because those get done a lot there. And just generally in agriculture, I'm a past president of the U.S. Agricultural Information Network, USAIN. If any of you are agriculture people. And yeah, and I've also been involved in projects like Series 2030, which was a large project to, it was a Gates Foundation funded grant project to answer large questions of how donors should invest money in agricultural interventions to prevent and end hunger. That is my background. And yeah, let's get started.
Yeah, so the way we've kind of divided things up is I'm going to give kind of a big picture description of evidence synthesis, talk about its value and why we think it's important for librarians to be involved in this work. And then I'm going to pass it to Megan, who's going to be talking about having a service to support this work at our various institutions. And then I'm going to come back in at the end to talk about if you're craving more information on this topic, here's where you could go to learn more. So, what is evidence synthesis? I bet some of you have had a little taste of this work, which is why you're here today. But let's all get on the same page. So we like this description from the Royal Society. I think it was from 2018. Saying that evidence synthesis refers to the process of bringing together information from a whole range of sources and disciplines to inform debates and decisions on specific issues. An accurate, concise, and unbiased synthesis of the evidence is therefore one of the most valuable contributions the research community can offer policymakers. So you may have heard of evidence synthesis talked about in terms of evidence-based medicine, evidence-based practice, evidence-based policy, evidence-based psychotherapy, teaching methods, everything. And one of the types or types of evidence synthesis that you may have heard of before is a systematic review. Systematic reviews are one type of evidence synthesis, but there's actually many, many different types of reviews. There's over 40, and I'll link to a source here in a future slide. Thank you, Megan. So why would we conduct evidence synthesis? Why would we want to synthesize the evidence? I'll give a quick example. You know, there's a lot of studies done on things like red wine is good for you. And then another study will say red wine is terrible for you. Chocolate is good for you. Dark chocolate is not good for you. So we have these one-off studies. And so then there's some value in synthesizing across all of the literature and doing quality appraisal. And so let's go through this list. Increased transparency and reproducibility. There's a great National Academies book on reproducibility and replicability, and they talk about the value of evidence synthesis in this conversation in terms of being a robust means for gaining confidence in scientific knowledge over time. And it's a way for us to assess all of the available evidence and really look at the reliability and the validity of bodies of research. Evidence synthesis is supposed to reduce bias and be carefully designed, conducted, and reported. It is sometimes useful for identifying gaps in the existing research, and it could influence decision-making. Next slide. So some typical components of these different review types. A lot of evidence synthesis reviews have rigorous methods, and they are attempting to be comprehensive in gathering absolutely everything written on a topic, regardless if it's peer review or not. So this is where that gray literature is really important to try to counter publication bias. Usually there's a really well-formulated research question. That question often gets massaged and refined during the protocol stages. Comprehensive, we're identifying and synthesizing across all of the available literature. And this is often outside of one, like a professor's own discipline. It could be, I'm a psychology professor, I need all the literature on this topic. And then in that work, we discover, oh, there's some sociologists over here also publishing on this topic. And it's very important that we grab all of that literature. These reviews are supposed to be done in an unbiased, reproducible way. So the methods are really transparent in a way that somebody should be able to pick up parts of the methods and rerun them, including the search methods. I mentioned already, sometimes reviews target gaps in the literature. So it would be great if you're like trying to apply for a grant that you could say, look, we did this really comprehensive deep dive and we found out that there is this, and this gap in the literature. And then kind of beating this drum too hard, providing evidence for practice and policy decision-making. Next slide. And it's really a range. This is just, 4 or 5 different review types. And I mentioned there's over 40, but it is a wide spectrum. So on one side, we have narrative reviews, which typically don't have very many rules. This could be like coursework from, graduate students who are looking to just investigate what's been published on a topic. But because there aren't necessarily conducting and reporting guidelines for narrative reviews, they could be like cherry picking those studies. Whereas as we move to the right across the slide, things are going to get more intense. So we go from having like a broader question on the left, where things are a little bit more unclear in the methodology and reporting standpoints, to getting more narrow, and more rigorous and more transparently reported on the right. Scoping reviews are typically a broader question, looking broadly at the literature of a topic, maybe not measuring the effectiveness of an intervention. They could be looking at a variety of research designs, for example, and a variety of interventions or risk factors. Systematic reviews are typically looking at an intervention, risk factors, sometimes prevalence, and analyzing that literature, synthesizing qualitatively. Whereas a meta-analysis takes that a step further and is quantitatively synthesizing. Next slide. So why would librarians be part of this work? Well, the research shows that reviews are better quality when there are librarians involved. We know how to target all of the literature on a topic. And we also happen to be pretty good at transparently reporting our methods in a way that other folks would be able to pick up the search methodologies that we've laid out in these published reviews, and to be able to run those searches in the databases that we've referred to. And there's evidence here in these links that I encourage you to check out. But it is pretty common practice for librarians to be doing co-author level work, like they're involved in the research design phase and they're carrying out, they're like executing the searches and exporting those results to provide the other research team members the opportunity to screen. Next slide. Thank you. We also have authoritative bodies, large research networks such as Campbell Collaboration and Cochrane, who have given like strident thoughts on the involvement of librarians, are really advocating for research teams engaged in these methods to invite a librarian on the team, or at least have them on the acknowledgements level if they're not performing the searches, for example, if they're just giving consultation advice. And Megan will talk more about that in terms of our service. So we like to cite this 2015 article that has it laid out on a nice table. Cochrane and Campbell handbooks have both been updated since this was published. But I would say, if anything, Cochrane and Campbell both have become even more strident about saying that you should have an information specialist involved in this work in order to help ensure that you're targeting everything published on a topic. Next slide. So I mentioned there's over 40 different review types. The first article here is from Grant and Booth 2009, and this is doing a deep dive and depicting the different reviews in tables for 14. When I am meeting with folks who I don't think are very familiar with the different review types, and having these consultations, I will often have both of these articles ready to share with them, just to make sure that they understand the difference between a scoping review and a systematic review, or the difference between a systematic review and a meta-analysis. The bottom article here is more current, so it's kind of an update, but it goes beyond the 2009 piece. And it categorizes different reviews. I think it's looking at 45, if my memory is correct. And there's been a lot of cool types of reviews that have been developed. So I encourage you to check that out. You may be working with a team, and a systematic review might not be the best option for them. Maybe one of those other 45 reviews types would be a better choice, in which case you can analyze what's available in these articles. Next slide. And I just wanted to touch briefly on the growth. So you may be noticing this in your increase in reference consultations asking to support evidence synthesis at your own institution. We certainly noticed this back around 2014 through 2017, where we're like, whoa, our disciplines, especially Megan and I, we're really seeing an interest from our patrons. They wanted to engage in these methodologies. And so it was important for us to start supporting it, or at least be conversational. And we wondered, is this just us at our institution, or is this happening elsewhere? So we started looking at publishing outputs, so journal articles or other publication types, I guess. Any instance of systematic review, scoping review, or meta-analysis in the title, and the growth over time. And so here you can see in the medical fields, which we kind of knew was true, there has been a continued growth in publications indexed in Embase, PubMed, and CINAHL. And then next slide, you get to see the growth outside of the health sciences. So here we're trying to capture the growth in business, agriculture, and nutrition with CAB abstracts, education with ERIC and Education Source, and then psychology, literature, and PsycInfo. And you can see we definitely are seeing growth here, maybe less so in business, but we've seen quite a growth in agriculture, nutrition, and in psychology. And so we knew from examining this in the various databases that we weren't just imagining it. This was really happening, and it certainly went beyond our institution. And so it was time for us to kind of get our bearings on these methodologies and know how we can best support this work. Next slide. So I'm going to hand it over to Megan, who is going to be talking about more practical things like starting services.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, so I'm going to go through, talk a little bit about our model for starting a service outside the health sciences. And I saw somebody had asked about if we would talk about how we worked with our health sciences library, and I definitely will do that. And also some other models. So I realize I've worked with through the Evidence Synthesis Institute. Every time we've taught it, I do a breakout room on starting an evidence synthesis service. And it really is so much of a conversation because everybody's got sort of a different context they're coming from, a different sized institution, different levels of resources, and different levels of demand. And so what I've got here is sort of a framework for like figuring out, some of the basics of what it takes to start a service and also some ways to think about it. And I'll also say that like having an official service is not the only way to do this and not the right way to do it for everyone, so, and not sustainable for everyone. So this can look all kinds of different ways. And yeah, I will mention a few of those throughout this. But what I don't want is for it to seem like this is the way to do it and you have to do it this way to have an official service. There's really, really vastly different levels of how involved to be, how to make this work, and what makes sense for each institution and librarian. So talking about starting our service. So it was back around 2016 and 2017 is when Amy and I started getting these requests, and some of our other colleagues in the social sciences and sciences started getting these too. And I'll never forget my first one came through our health sciences library, which our library system, our university has a medical school. So they have their own library, and their librarians had their own evidence synthesis service or systematic review service, they called it then. And since I do nutrition, one day they wrote to me and said, "Oh, hey, Megan, we got a request from somebody in nutrition who wants to do a review. Since you're the liaison, do you want to take that? They want to do a systematic review." And I said, "Sure. Will you tell me how to do that?" And I had, a crash course with the librarian at the health sciences library, and we got through it, but it wasn't pretty. And I quickly realized like, this is a skill and I'm going to need more training in this, and ended up going to the Pittsburgh training. And then as I started talking to my colleagues like Amy, we realized, this is happening more and more outside the health sciences. And what does it mean that the health sciences offer as a service? And it's just sort of whatever your liaison knows outside of that, or sometimes the health sciences librarians will help you. And we really wanted to stop and think about like, how can we make this more organized, or are we offering a consistent level of service across our library? So if nutrition people are coming, are they getting the same level of service that someone in clinical nutrition would, or someone in public health, someone at the medical school? So it was a really bottom up sort of thing that Amy, a group of liaison librarians came together. We brought this to our supervisors who brought this up, and, it was coming from demand in our departments and really grew out of that. And the first thing we did was sort of build this case. So our supervisors said, put together a proposal. And I'm sharing here this really nice proposal from Princeton University that Megan Testerman made much more recently. But that she based on some of our materials and things as well. And it's a really nice example of that, of presenting to our administration, our library administration, like, look, here's the demand we're seeing, some of those charts, that have now been updated, but looking at the growth in these disciplines, we're getting demand from our people. This is how many people have published already these things without our help here. And here's, the guidelines that say librarians should be involved. And we think it's really important that there's quality services to produce this quality research that's informing all of this policy and decision-making. The gist of it. So they gave us a year to sort of figure out what a service would look like, and put together a model for it. And throughout that year, we had to determine sort of the size of our service team for us. So we're a large institution with a liaison model, right? So this doesn't, it's not a one-to-one transfer to every other type of institution. So for us, what that looked like is about 6 liaison librarians was our core team of non-health sciences librarians. And that looked different, that had to be different than our health sciences library, where all the health sciences librarians are part of their systematic review team because that's part of being a health sciences librarian. It's not part of every other discipline. So, you know, a lot of arts and humanities people weren't involved, or, you know, and people can get involved as demand increases, or I'll share a little more about the model and how we keep everyone in the loop. Even if it's a one-off, occasionally you could get a request or you're very involved and want to be on the team. We had to figure out how we were training our team. So, you know, a few of us had gone to the Michigan or Pittsburgh institutes. And again, those were both health sciences focused, and those get you pretty far. But there are some differences. And definitely when it comes to the searching, if your primary database is not PubMed, that can look a lot different. And it's it can be a lot harder because like the structured controlled vocabulary and things are not as nice outside of PubMed. And also the just newness of these methods to our disciplines meant that most of our researchers were brand new to doing this. We're looking to us for a lot of guidance on the methods and yeah, needed a lot of support in that way. And we had to figure out our scope of involvement. And for that first year, we didn't define it exactly. And that was kind of nice to have a pilot year, like when we first launched the service and said, you know, I don't know, like this is a pilot. I'm going to help you through this. We'll see how it goes and how much time this takes for me. And this might not be what we're able to offer in the future. And I'll have some examples of where we landed on a future slide here. And then thinking about how we would roll this out and advertise our services, because at the time we were in close communication with our colleagues at Cornell University, who were at the time the only other people we knew who were doing this sort of thing, like launching a service outside the health sciences. And they were about a year ahead of us. And they said, do not talk about it. You will be overwhelmed with demand. So we were cautious about how we launched that and did a real soft, like first, you know, just put it out to some of the liaison librarians. Or the first thing we did actually was that search of, we used the experts. It's Pure is the product behind it. But we did a search of our faculty at the University of Minnesota who had published systematic reviews or meta-analyses or scoping reviews. And reached out to some of them in our departments and said, hey, I see that you've published a systematic review in the past. If you ever do another one, we now have this service. Let us know if you'd like to work together. We started there. Then we did like some language for liaison librarians in the most active departments that would be doing these, and people sent it out to their faculty there and researchers, and we kind of waited there. And then, you know, we did a little bit more, and eventually, you know, announced it to the whole campus, but made sure at each step that we weren't being overwhelmed. And I would say, yeah, now we hardly do any marketing because we are so busy, and it's mostly word of mouth that people hear in their departments. Oh, my colleague worked with you. I really want to as well. And then we had to also come up with a plan for assessing our services. And, you know, how are we going to keep track of these really big long-term projects? So in our first year, we might not have a publication to show for it, but what can we track? We can track how many requests we got, how many different departments we worked with, you know, which ones turned out to actually be evidence synthesis reviews versus how many were narrative reviews that we handed off to liaison librarians, or things like that. And we did a little bit of time tracking to try to do that. It's hard to get a whole team to time track, I'll say. Amy's good at it. The rest of us are not. And that's sort of how we built our service and the model that we came up with. So I mentioned, like, we have this specific model, and we did publish an article about it. So if it's useful to you, if you want to come back and look a little more in depth at how this model works, it's basically like, how does it work that we have, you know, 6 of our, I don't know, 50 liaison librarians are part of this team. But if we get, say, all right, for example, like we'll get a request. I've gotten some recently from the College of Design, and the College of Design's librarian is not on our team. And so how this works when a request comes in is that it will go to me and Amy, and we decide who is going to be the lead from our team. So usually that's whoever's closest in subject matter. So in this case, somehow that was me because the design stuff has a lot of engineering overlap. So being the sciences person, I took that one. And then we pull in our subject liaison for that department, and have them be part of the team as well. And then there's a third person. So this was especially useful when we first started our service. And, you know, a few of us had been through those trainings, a few of us had not. And a few of us had worked on reviews with people, and a few were brand new to it and wanted some apprenticeship before they were out leading on their own. So we built in this third person to our teams, and that as we were getting started, it was the newer people to the team, people who were new to doing this. They would shadow along on the process and be part of it, of all the meetings. And then once they felt comfortable, they could move into this lead role on other reviews that came in. And then we keep that sort of third person role just as if we need a search strategy reviewer. So they don't have to be involved through the whole process, but if I need someone else to look over my search strategy before we do it, that we can pull in the third person for that. And having that administrative support and buy-in is really important for the subject liaison part, because we had to go do sort of a roadshow to all the subject liaisons and say, like, this is our new service and you are part of it in this way. We're going to work with you. And it's an expectation that you will work with us on these. And there's also a range of how much they can be involved. So in general, we say, like, all right, we're bringing the evidence synthesis knowledge and methods, expertise, you're bringing the subject area knowledge, and that's how we're going to make this work. Is, you know, we'll come up with a plan together. You're going to advise on the search strategy, search terms, databases. I'm going to make sure we're following all the methods and talk with the team through the process. So, and this could be, so we can have as many as 3 people working on a review and as few as 1, because sometimes the team lead is the subject liaison and just needs a reviewer or doesn't. So it's a sort of expandable, flexible model in that way. And it helps us train in new people. So when we get new people to our team, they can slot into this apprentice role and get comfortable doing consultations and working on these types of reviews before they move into the team lead role. We also eventually landed on 2 defined tiers of service. And again, we copied this from Cornell. And I think many people use this sort of framework now. So our baseline level that everyone gets who requests is our consultant level. And so at that level, we say it's a time limited. We say we'll provide up to 4 hours of our time. But as I'll mention later, we now are sort of share a public front with our health sciences library, and they will give even less time than that. So we don't say the amount on there, but when we meet with people, we tell them, you know, you get up to 4 hours of our time. We'll help you with background information. We'll recommend databases and protocol registration platforms and citation management software. And then we'll consult on your search strategy and suggest edits and help you get it into a form that you can go run it. And that's pretty much all we offer there. And then at our discretion, we have the co-author level, which is a more substantial commitment, and it sort of is the amount of time that it takes. It's not limited in time, and we really become a part of the team. So we're helping comment on the protocol. Usually I'm the one who registers the protocol. When we're doing that, we are selecting the databases, we're writing the search strategy, running all the searches in all the databases, exporting those results, getting them into citation management software or into Covidence. We now have a subscription to Covidence that people can use if they work with us. Real quick, because I saw that question, I'm registering mostly at OSF, Prospero, if it's something health sciences adjacent, like that works sometimes with nutrition or genetic counseling. I was involved with a lot too. But, and then there's the collaboration for environmental evidence, if it's an environmental science one. All right, doing deduplication, setting up the article screening software, and we then, you know, when it's all done, write the portion of the method section where we're talking about the searches. So this is a much heavier tier of involvement. And so we do leave that at our discretion, because also we see ourselves as autonomous researchers who get to decide. That gives us some leverage, some way to say, like, you know, if this doesn't feel like a good fit for me to be part of your team, I don't have to do that. And it gives us some, like, sometimes we just don't have the capacity to be co-authoring on that many reviews right now. Or we can say to people, like, I don't have capacity to co-author right now, but if we can wait 2 months, I could. That gives both the research teams and us some flexibility in how they want us and how we want to be involved. Yeah. And as I said, so working again with the health sciences, so we started sort of as our own, and we're consulting with them a bunch on their methods and stuff. And over the last few years, we've really grown that into a more blended model, where we still have 2 separate services, but we work together a lot more. And we wanted to make it more, when we first started, we had a separate web page that people should go to request our services if they were not in the health sciences. And we wanted this to be not something people have to think about, like, who they're going to. So we now just have one web page with one request form and some back-end logic that people put in the department they're from. And if it's health sciences, it goes to their team. If it's not, it goes to me and Amy. And so sort of the workflow of this is someone submits a request, it gets filtered to whichever team. Then we go through is this really an evidence synthesis review? If not, we send it to the liaison. If yes, then we try to find the best match within our team. And we start emailing the group to set some expectations and set an initial meeting. And then we determine which role we're going to be in, co-author or consultant. And then if we are a co-author, we go on to do all those parts that I talked about, and hopefully eventually results in a research output, but not always, as you've probably experienced if you've worked on these. Not everything makes it to the end. And sometimes, you know, something will go away for a couple years and then it comes back and your team just shows up out of the blue and says, hey, I want to finish this. So those we call zombie reviews. That's general workflow. Some other examples I wanted to talk about. So that's a lot on our model and how we made that work. But as I said, doesn't work in every scenario. So some other models that I've seen people iterate on or go with are or being only a consultant and sometimes limiting that to one consultation. So I put here Texas A&M as an example of that, where they have robust LibGuides and support materials. And I actually don't know if that's still their model, but when we started our service, we had Margaret Foster from Texas A&M come and train our whole team. And she, at that time, not anymore, was the only person doing any evidence synthesis support at Texas A&M. So she had hundreds of consultations a year, like very limited time. And so was not co-authoring, was doing, you know, had really organized materials and support materials, and would like get people in and hand them off with some videos to watch and resources, and, you know, get them going on their search strategy mostly when they were with her. And so that can be a way to provide, you know, to get a lot of bang for your buck in creating some materials and having those available asynchronously for a lot of people. There's the tiered model that I talked about that we copied from Cornell. And then another model is the University of Victoria. So we work really closely with one of the librarians there, Zara Premji, and she's talked about, like, they don't call it a service because they want more autonomy in how they decide to do these things, but they do have it as part of a suite of services they offer for grant support, and they expect to be written into the grant. And so that's really the only way that they are working at that co-author level, is if it's a grant supported project. Yeah. So a few different ways to work with that. And then there are also, you know, single liaison librarians who are the only ones who offer it to their departments as a one-off. And if you don't have administrative support, sometimes that's all it can be. But I think there's a real like argument to make for like, how are we able to standardize these services and things? But depending on resources and politics that may or may not work. And sometimes all you can do is help the people in your own liaison departments or wherever you are do the best reviews they can to the best of your ability in terms of your time and resources. So no matter what level you author, I think that like what Margaret Foster really impressed on us was like, no matter the level of training or the level of involvement you have, like these are going to be better for you being involved because people are really not trained as searchers and you'll see so many bad searches out there in published reviews. So, so figuring out what you're able to do is going to help these no matter what. And I think a question that I sort of got at with the University of Victoria service, and this is a question for another time, but something to think about is if you're getting started in this is like, is service even the right word for this? And what expectations does this word set? I think that we get stuck in that a lot in libraries where, I'm like, oh, if I did this again, would I call it like a partnership or something? Because I really want, especially if we're working at that co-author level, like this isn't a service I'm necessarily offering you. I am like fully a part of this team and we have expectations too. And there have been difficult things where we've had to back out of projects or take our name off of them because they didn't meet the standards we would want to have our names attached to. So just food for thought. Now back to Amy.
Thanks, Megan. All right, so I'm going to be talking about like after you leave today, if you'd like to pursue more information on this topic and work on building a community, here are some resources for you. And as I was monitoring chat a little bit, I couldn't get everything read, but some of these links were already shared by folks who have been involved in this work. So thank you. And I also just want to say that this can be really intimidating work. Like Megan kind of talked about that when we started getting requests from our patrons. It felt kind of lonely, like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I feel like I'm not equipped. And so we just want to make sure that you're aware of some mostly free resources that are available. There is an interest group through ACRL, Evidence Synthesis Methods Interest Group, that you could join. I'm incoming convener of that group. Megan rolled off as a past convener. And in that group, we have had some mentoring arrangements. So we've done a call for mentors and a call for mentees if you want somebody to help you through like your first review. And we do have Journal Club as part of that work and an active listserv. There is the Campbell Collaborations Information Retrieval Methods group. That's an email address there, but they also have a website if you wanted to Google it. A few of us have been active in that group and really working in terms of like best practices and setting best practices in terms of methodology in the Cochrane and Campbell handbooks. There's the Medical Library Association Expert Searching Listserv, which is really active listserv. Obviously it's medical, but I know I have gleaned some things over the years and have asked like stumper questions on that listserv, like, why is the database doing this weird thing? And so if you have expert searching questions, you could join that listserv. And then this has been shared in the chat. There is a symposium coming up soon that you could register to attend for free. Megan, the next slide, I think it has more detail on this one. Could you advance? Nope, I must have it on the next one. Never mind, just go back. There we go. So in June, there's this conference, and Megan and I were not on the planning committee for this conference, but we know some of the fabulous people who organized it. But it's later this month, free registration, virtual, open for all, and you can see the website there. I'll be speaking at it, so if you attend, I'll be seeing you, some of you there. Can we go back to, I'm sorry, Megan. I think the Institute, there we go. So this was also shared in the chat. We applied for an IMLS grant and launched the Evidence Synthesis Institutes, which have been held twice a year, mostly August and March for the past 4 years. forms. And we are now at the end of our IMLS funding to pay for the instructors and some of the course design work that went into this institute. So the University of Minnesota is going to fund the August and March institutes this coming academic year. We are now in the application period right now, so you have until June 12th to apply. We have a max of 50 seats. It's in the virtual environment, and participants who are accepted in this 50 seat cap would attend for free. And yeah, so you have until June 12th for us to screen your application, and the link is there. Next slide. You could also consider, if you're feeling like you don't have a community, there's some really cool examples of communities of practice. So one example is in Ithaca. So Cornell and Ithaca both located there, Ithaca College, I should say, where they have librarians interested and engaged in some of this work. At the recent Evidence Synthesis Institute conference, they presented on their collaborative work, and we have a link to those slides that you could view. The other example here is from some universities in Texas who have worked together. They've also presented on their community of practice, which is how I know about these things. So you can reference their materials there, and maybe start something in your local area or virtual. Next slide. And we can skip, thank you. And then, pretty cool, Megan and I have been working on developing an online course. So we're taking a lot of the scaffolding that we designed for the Evidence Synthesis Institute and have been trying to translate it to this open online course. And we're working with Carnegie Mellon's Open Learning Initiative. We are in beta testing phase right now. That's just actually last week closed, and now we're reviewing critiques, and we'll continue to improve until it's ready to share publicly. And we'll try to share that as widely as possible, because we know there's a need. For every Evidence Synthesis Institute, we get way more applicants than we can possibly train with our 50 seat max. And so we're hoping that this online course could fill some of that training need that folks have. So we'll be sharing that far and wide when it's ready. All right, that is all. We know there were some questions, and so we'll leave it to, let's see. I think somebody was tracking them, and then we'll be answering them or attempting to answer them.
We have some questions that came in the chat. We may have some more that come in, so we'll try to get to as many as we can. And if we don't get to them, we'll make a copy of them for you to see later. I think that you both spoke to some of this early on, but one of our first questions was, can you speak to how you collaborate with the librarians who provide evidence synthesis services in the health sciences, biomedical sciences library?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about how we have this sort of, now it's more of a unified web presence, but also on the back end, we're doing a lot more together too. So we used to sort of have our own separate meetings, and the lead of their team would come to our meetings, but that was about it. But now there's, new people in the groups, and we've decided, we have regular joint meetings with them to do some like joint professional development and talking about topics and just like troubleshooting stuff. We had a meeting where we sort of introduced everyone and talked through what our expertise was. If you need to phone a friend, here's what I'm good at, sort of stuff. So it's really a good working relationship. But we do operate separately, and sometimes, like over the past year, they've had several times to pause their service where we have not, because they've had too much demand, and they had a lot of new staff coming in and that had to get trained up as well. So
I'll add that because so many like systematic review questions are multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, I think is the better word choice there. There's often instances where psychology reviews that I'm the liaison for, I benefit from pulling in some health science expertise, right? They could give me guidance on the mesh headings, right? So I think it's been really valuable to work together in those respects, but also also realizing that there's differences, right, with health sciences. They've been engaged in this work for a longer time than we have. And there's just differences that exist, and we are respectful of that.
We'll also add you're getting a lot of appreciation in the chat if you haven't had a chance to see the chat. Our next question focused more on liaison librarians and what that looked like. Did they get release time to update their skills? Did they receive professional recognition, support from administration? So I'll put that in the chat as well. Kind of a multi-parted question.
So we are tenure-like at the University of Minnesota. We don't have faculty status, but we are continuous appointment track. So there's in being engaged in publishing or presentations on these reviews, different forms of output is valuable in that way. The acknowledgement, like it could help you advance from assistant to associate to full, etc. Like I know I've benefited from that. I think Megan would say so too. So there's recognition in that respect. I think in terms of like making time for this and our already maybe 2 full job descriptions, some changes at the U that maybe helped this was that collection development has been taken off my plate quite a bit over time. Like we've moved more to like evidence-based collections. Megan, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'll just add that another thing we also don't work on reference desks or do chat reference or any of that. So that's a thing that frees up liaison librarian time. And Amy and I in running the service have had a portion of our time set aside for it, but individual like liaison librarians who are not part of the service do not per se, but it's just becomes part of their liaison. It's part of the suite of liaison services. And when they're working with us, we sort of give them the option of like, do you just want to consult on databases or do you want to come in and be a co-author too? And usually they do. And so, it has happened that with teams we're working on, we could say we want to have up to 3 librarians as co-authors on this, and really no one has had any problem with that. Usually it's 2, and that's been fine with people to have 2 librarian co-authors on it. And so then they're getting that recognition and stuff as well. So we give them both a range of how much time to be involved in it, and they're also getting the publication benefits and things that count towards continuous appointment and those deeper relationships with their departments. So which I think is really valuable for liaisons.
You both touched a little bit on the co-authoring service. I had a few different questions on that. I'm going to try to combine them into one set of questions, but how do you formally discuss author order? How many lead authors? And then there was a related question of how you backed out of an authorship agreement when the review wasn't quite up to standard.
Megan and I both have examples. I just want to recognize that this is being recorded. So it's tricky, right? Working with teams. I think it's taken practice, right? To get to the point where we can say, I really am not willing to work on a review that's not going to do a protocol. So I'm out, or I feel strongly that this review should be following the best practices set forth by Campbell or wherever. And since you are not interested in having 2 independent screeners on each item, I'm out. And they've seemed okay with that so far. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'm sure people have had this happen before. They get written in like in the acknowledgements. Surprise, we listed you in the acknowledgements, and it might be something that you didn't really want to be listed in the acknowledgements for. So I think there's just different things that you learn as you go.
Yeah, and that whole conversation is you get more comfortable with it of negotiating that stuff, but having that laid out tiered service makes it really helpful that we can just say like, here's the tiers of service. You can work with me as a consultant. I have capacity to work as a co-author. Here's what I would do and what we would expect. Some places do a whole memorandum of understanding that they expect people to sign at the outset. So that's an option too. And you can look up examples of those at other institutions. We decided we didn't want to be that formal, but we do reserve the right to back out. And I'll give the example that happened to me recently was, a team came to me after they'd already submitted something and it had gotten sent back and from the journal, and they wanted to actually turn it into a systematic review when they had not used systematic methods beforehand. And they had a very short timeline. And, I was game to try it. And I said, here's what we'll have to do if you want to try this with me. We're going to have to do it really fast, and this is going to be your life for the next month. And, and we got to the part where I'd done the searches and handed off the search results. And they said, this is too many. We want to just use one database. And I said, well, I get that because you are on a tight timeline and this is the constraints you're working in right now and you have to do what you have to do, but that's not going to be something that I want to be attached to. So you can just take this and run with it. And I hope that, I look forward to working with you in the future from the outset of a project if you do another one. And they were great with that. Actually, they were very kind. And I try to be really nice and say like, oh, this just isn't working this isn't something that meets my expectations of what I want in a review or what I would want to put my name on. And, when I work on a review, I want it to have all these steps and I want it to be this thorough. So I'm happy to have given you some information and we can do that in the future.
Thank you both for sharing there, and yes, with consideration for this being recorded as well. We have one more question in the chat, and this is kind of a big one, but how do you think AI will impact or is currently impacting evidence synthesis?
I think there's a lot TBD. Our colleague Sarah Young knows so much more about why she was here that she could talk about it. She's from Carnegie Mellon. I think there's different ways that we could benefit from using different tools in terms of like helping develop our search terms. There's so much being automated in terms of like subject heading assignments, like we're being involved with these technologies, whether we like it or not. Megan, what do you think?
I have opinions.
Yeah.
I think the best use for it is what it's being used for already, which is like helping with the screening process, which can be really onerous. And there are tools that use AI to help like bump more relevant things to the top. But I think, there's this terrible, like horrific thing that when ChatGPT first was like open to the public, someone immediately like published a YouTube video. It was an MD who published this video that was like how to write a systematic review in an hour using ChatGPT. And it was a nightmare. And it's like, this is not at all a systematic review. And like, it's not going to do that because part of the whole reducing bias part of it is that you're having these human decisions being made and this human, like there are things you can only tell by an actual expert reading this. So like, I think things would have to be a lot better than they can be at this point. And, but for some of those things, like, yeah, help us generate some search terms, help us, like bump more relevant things to the top. I think with some of that, making our lives easier, but not doing it, it's not going to do the whole thing. It's not going to write it for you. It's not going to do all the screening for you and pull out the relevant set because it can't make those nuanced decisions, especially with gray literature. It's really hard to screen. So again, I think it's that like, I saw some tweet today or something that like from an artist that was like, I wanted AI to do my laundry and wash my dishes so I could do my art, not do my art so I could do my laundry. Not make art so I could do my laundry and wash my dishes. And I feel somewhat like that in that like some parts of this are kind of an art or require some expertise. And so like I want it to do the parts that can be, that we can take a little, that can use a little more automation or like, those things, but it's not going like there's an art to these things. There's like I say that with making search strategies and things, it is an art and a science. So
Yeah, and I also want to hold to the reproducible nature of reviews. Like, however AI is implemented, like it can't be just like a snapshot in time. It needs to be something that somebody else could pick up next week and rerun. I think that's a little concerning sometimes with AI.
Thank you both so much. This has been a really wonderful presentation. Just want to say again, thank you to both of you as our panelists for your expertise with us today. I would also like to thank Brian Lim, Aloha Sharp, and everyone at the ACRL office who always help make the magic happen here with these presentations. Remember that we will send the link to the recording and other supplemental documents for this session when it is available. A reminder, I'll post it in the chat a couple more times to please fill out our brief evaluation, a link to which has been posted here. And thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.